Yeah, I weren't really that excited for it. I mean, Steve's interview before the game got me really fired up for it.
Do a Steve impression.
Yeah, well, we just got a lot of good players and, just go out there and perform.
The end. Yeah. No, I mean, it's tough, isn't it? Because they're on a hide into nothing, really, because everyone expected them to put 50, and it was about the performance. It was about, what they're going to show. And there was a bit of a mixed bag, really. And it is underwhelming because you played 3, lost 3 leading into that game, and it's a game that everyone expects you to win. Eddie Jones has come in and he's bought a bin man, he's bought a sushi maker, he's bought a fisherman, basically the most inexperienced team to ever come to Twickenham, I think it was. Apart from
all important roles, though, in the hospitality and food industry, because without them 3, you're probably getting a coli and the place is a mess.
Exactly. So, I mean, I was in the hospitality, actually. It's very good with Corinthians, so shout out to them. But it's, I mean, I looked through the team sheet. Jimeno at 7 for him is a player that we all recognise. But then I'm looking through the team sheet and going down the Japanese team and looking, don't know him, and you have to do a bit of research. And I know they've had a tough time in terms of the amount of games they've played in between the 19 World Cup and the 23 World Cup. And then obviously Eddie Jones has come in and he's on a journey, mate, and trying to get them to promote players with limited experience. Like Michael Leach still wants to play, apparently, but he's about 46 now, so Eddie Jones wouldn't pick him. But he's evolving and looking for the future. But that was all about England. One of the things that I was speaking to Ben Youngs before the game, and one of the things we were chatting around was it seemed like picking the back row that Steve picked in Ben Earl, Underhill and Curry, it was like, well, Japan are going to play fast, so we need 3 fast back rowers. And it was more like the attitude was not what we're going to imprint on the game. It's like, what are Japan going to do? So we're going to try and negate that a little bit. You talk about the selection, Tom Curry, yes, he's passed all the protocols around it, but he's been concussed twice in the last couple of months. And did we need to play Tom Curry? What are you learning by playing Tom Curry against Japan? And so Chandler Cunningham South probably should have started, and he did pretty well when he came on because Underhill went off injured. But, you can only beat what's in front of you, right? And England, we went to our driving maul game, which got us a lead. We weren't as accurate as we'd like to be in attack. I still think there's a disconnect between how the players play at club level and their strengths. And then, I don't know, club form doesn't necessarily replicate itself on the international stage, but there seems a bit of this England team in attack are trying to find their way. They're hesitating a little bit, which means the lines aren't spot on. It's like, do we go to the edge or do we have to play in a certain way? And it looks a little bit lethargic, muddled, slow at times. But towards the end of the game, it was really sharp. And again, the power game, we've talked about international rugby's a power game now, isn't it? And we were, our forward set piece was great. The driving game was great. I thought Will Stewart, who had been questioned and put under a bit of pressure by some of the bigger nations that we've played in this autumn, did really well. What about his 25-metre pass over the top to Cunningham South? How good was that to see? There's some real positives around how England can play. Roebuck came on and did really well. Freeman, with his flick around the back, was class. Haven't seen enough of him really over the autumn. But, England were on, under pressure. Everyone expects them to win. They produced what they produced. But it was a bit of a damp squib in terms of how to end an autumn nations when we've had, 3 defeats. Eddie Jones coming to town made Steve Borthwick pick, in my opinion, what he thought was his gun 15, his best team, because he was worried about getting a result, losing to Eddie. What would that mean? And when you see the first 10 or 15 minutes, it was never in question what the result was going to be. But, you see a lot of other teams in these games where they're playing the tier 2 supposed nations or the lower ranked nations, because every home nation had to play a tier 2 nation, didn't they? So the Scots played Portugal, the Welsh played Fiji, Irish played Fiji as well, England played Japan. And so Steve went with his best 15 because he needed to get a win. And so we haven't learned a lot. We haven't learned that much about certain players, but it was cohesive enough to know that there's some very good players in the squad. And we saw Finn Smith come on, and I look back on it, and I wonder if Steve has got the minerals to come out and say, I made mistakes during this autumn. My selection of the bench at times, my use of substitutions at times wasn't right, and it cost us games. Where you see Finn Smith come on, and you mentioned it earlier, Jim, he looked controlled, he looked, composed. The attack looked slick when he was on. I know it's against Japan towards the death, and they were out on their feet. But Japan put us under pressure with some of their attacking play. They scored a worldie of a try in the first half from England's poor defence. And defence is a real issue. Let's not beat around Jim's bush here.
Well, to quote Austin Healey, he said it's a disaster. And you could see at moments in that game in the exact same crease around 13. And again, players missing tackles who you never think would miss tackles because they're unsure about whether they're third defender, fourth defender, fifth defender, and they're getting done by a tier 2 team who ain't that great at the minute, and they're getting busted left, right and centre. So I do wonder, Goody, whether or not they will change that system, and how you change that system having got no more games than you're going into a Six Nations, which is important for every team. Whether they change the defence coach, Paul Gustard's being bandied about. Been texting Guzzy actually about his Fijian teenager that he's got there. Unbelievable. Whether they bring a new system in. Can you bring a new system in, or they double down on that? Because if they do, if England defend like that in the Six Nations against Scotland, right? Just use Scotland the way that they play and how good they are around them channels and in the wide channels. Against your islands, against your French, you're struggling. Because I don't think you change it. Even if Henry Slade's got 10 more games in the bank at that point, and then he becomes the player that he was before his injury. And Henry Slade's a brilliant player, but he hasn't played. And he's having to run the defence and run that style of defence, the shuttle we spoke about last week. So we don't want to go over old ground. But Austin Healey said it was a disaster. And we had the wide kind of view of it. We had the bird's eye view of the mistakes that they had. Japan ain't a great team. I know that they opened up the All Blacks when they played them, and they played against France, and they scored some decent tries, and we know that they've got that in them. But if you're England, the number one focus in the game against Japan, you want to get your attack. With all the pressure they've been under defensively, would have been around defence. Make sure our defence, make sure the blitz is right, make sure we don't get opened up around the 9-10 channel. And there was... if I was in the England camp, that's what I'm saying, as if we were doing it. I'm saying it as if I'm Borthers. So I do wonder whether or not they will change the defence coach, and they bring in, like I said, like a Paul Gustard, who is being bandied about. I know he wants the job. I imagine he wants the job. I'm
with you, Jim. I'm with you. And, I said it last week. I don't think Joel Abt is the right man for the job. He's got the job because he's Steve's mate and he's a coach, and they needed a stopgap after Felix Jones jumped ship. And the big thing for me, and you're looking at Conor O'Shea and Bill Sweeney as the people that are going to be reviewing the Autumn Nations, etc. So they need to be asking the questions. Why did Felix Jones leave? Why did Alan Walters leave? You've got two of the best in the world. And it's all been like, no, just sweep it under the carpet. We won't say anything. Steve's got a responsibility to answer those questions. And Steve's got another responsibility of saying, right, well, now they've gone, what's the best plan of action? And Joel Abt isn't the best plan of action for England to be their defensive coach. And I've said it time and time again, a lack of experience in that coaching team then the team copies that and has a lack of experience and, there's no big voice to help the players in tough times. And that's why we've lost 3 games and 5 on the spin. And okay, now we've beaten Japan. But, Joel Abt is still going to be Oyonnax's head coach over the Six Nations. So it just doesn't work. And for me, I don't think he has the coaching pedigree to lead England's defence. I do think you can have a hammer defence, as they call it, mixed with an up and up and an up and out. And the best teams will be able to defend scenarios in different ways. Yet England defend every scenario with let's fucking fly off the line, blitz in and just try and smash someone and hope for the best. And that's what it feels like as a fan and a pundit watching it. Any scenario, you go in as hard as you can, inwards. We saw the try that Japan scored when there's a big hole between George Martin and Cunningham South. China Cunningham South steps in because obviously that's the system, but it's not the right decision to step in, which leaves a big gap between him and George Martin. George Martin's worried about the width as well, and then doesn't have time to step in to make the tackle, and they score. So we'll get carved up by way better teams than Japan if we continue on this process of always just blitzing or always just having the hammer defense coming at you, whatever's in front of you. And that's the thing where we need to be more intelligent. So that needs to come from the coaches. And, there's some good coaches that could add real value to this England defence, I think. And without being asked, Joe Abd isn't the man and shouldn't be, in my opinion, coaching England's defence because he's Steve's mate. And it's harsh saying it, but I speak in facts and truths, and that's what I think, and therefore they'll probably do the opposite and give him a contract extension.
Well, Goody, Rob asked me the question to grade Scotland out of 10. I hated getting graded as a player. I actually don't like doing that, but Rob, you started this narrative. So I gave Scotland 7.5 out of 10 for the Autumn Nations series. Grade England, if you may.
I'm going to say a 5 out of 10. A 5 out of 10 because there has been some reasonable parts, but there's been some huge errors from the coaching team, individual errors on the pitch, which have kind of mirrored the coaching team's lack of experience. Take Ben Earl, for example. Ben Earl has had some brilliant moments over the autumn. He's had some real poor moments as well. And he said it himself, right? He said he lost sleep over missing that tackle against Damien Diolande, which had a big impact on that game. The no-arms tackle against New Zealand had a big impact on that game as well in allowing them to get back to it. So those individual errors, and the issue for England is a lot of the errors, they're not repetitive errors. They're different errors regularly, which means, you're backing up error on error, but with a different mistake, a different lack of discipline. And it's hard then to just pinpoint one or two things, and it shows that there's a lot more wrong than there's perhaps right, but there is a lot of positivity around, some of the players and how we performed for patches of those 4 games. So it's a 5 out of 10, not great. Is it a disaster? Is it a crisis? No, but what it does do, that Scotland victory puts our performance against Australia under the spotlight and gone, well, Scotland are way better than us. Scotland have taken Australia and beaten them comfortably towards the end. And, we got into a big lead against Australia, buckled under pressure, made some errors, basic errors, made some poor substitutions, and then we lose the game. So it shows where England are at, and we are behind Scotland now. Scotland are above us now in the world rankings, which hurts, but it's deserved. And so England, it's not back to the drawing board, but it is for defence. So it's taken some of the positives and building week on week and learning. We don't lose, we learn.
Well, give us some positives, Andrew.
Positives are hopefully we'll get Alex Mitchell back at 9, which I think he's been a big miss, to be fair. And you take, let's not forget, you take out some of the experience of a Courtney Laws, and players like that. It takes time to fill that void a little bit. But positives for me, I'd say Maro played some really good stuff at times. I thought he was a little bit quiet the weekend. Marcus Smith at 10. And finally, Steve, hopefully understanding that you've got to back him to the hilt and not have a George Ford over his shoulder or someone like that where you're going to take him off in a winning position. What else? I thought Ollie Lawrence was very good at times. But there's been some collective. Ollie Slightholme, is a player that wasn't in the starting 15 for game 1. Every time he touches the ball, as he does for Saints, he's electric. His speed, his strength for a smaller guy in terms of height, he bounces through tackles, his skill to score that try at the weekend with his little kick through and then put the toe down to win the foot race to get the try. Ollie Slightholme's been a revelation, I think, at times. And then you look at where do you play? And there's a big shout for me. I'm saying if you're Steve Borthwick and you've now got these EPS contracts where you're sort of got more power over the player, first thing I'd be doing if I'm Steve Borthwick is phoning up Phil Dowson and Sam Vesti and saying, please, 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 can you play Tommy Freeman at outside centre? Can you put Freeman at outside centre so I can look at him? And that should be a viable option for England.
Because then you've got Ollie Slightholme, Feo Boso, and a Freeman at 13.
Yeah, Tom Roebuck, who came on and did really well. And so for me, I want to see Freeman playing at 13 for Saints as an option. We've had issues around defence there. Henry Slade, brilliant player, has made a few errors. And he leads that defence for Exeter. So I don't think it's just him. I think it's more a case of the team aren't comfortable always defending that way. And that's where a lot of the errors come from. So, for me, some positives, more negatives than positives, though, and big questions around Steve and his understanding of managing his squad and making decisions on selection and use of a bench, which have cost England the games, I think.
Something flashed up last week that I watched, and it was Dan Bigger doing a thing for the Rugby Pod, actually, on YouTube around the 10s and the fly halves. And we mentioned Finn Smith there. And Biggs used quite a nice phrase. Not nice of you, Marcus Smith. Or maybe it is nice, but he called him a disconnected 10, right? And we will get onto Ireland and we'll talk about, I know they played Fiji, but you saw Sam Prendergast, how connected he was with the backs and they had a Johnny Sexton feel to it. But Biggs maybe has something in that because Marcus Smith is a disconnected 10 and Finn Smith is arguably more connected in attack, do you definitely think Marcus Smith is the right 10 to take England forward?
Yeah, I do. And I've said it. I think Finn Smith should have been on the bench from game one of our autumn. And I tweeted it yesterday. I actually think if Finn Smith had been on the bench and we'd have made the changes, Steve does exactly the same thing, replacing Marcus Smith with Finn Smith against New Zealand. I still think we go and win that game because of how Finn is both in attack and defence and controlling and understanding game management, which is where we went wrong. Same against Australia when George Ford went to 10, made that awful call to go out the back and Kellaway gets the intercept. So Marcus Smith, I still don't feel that any England coach has given him the keys to be successful in how he wants to run an attacking team and play his game to his strengths. There's always been a shadow of Farrell and then Ford and then am I coming off, am I staying on? Are you the primary voice of that team as a 10 running the show? Finn Smith is I think he's a fantastic player and he did very well in the last 20 minutes when he came on against Japan. And he does control things well. And he has connections with the likes of Furbank, with the likes of Freeman, Slightholme. And it's a natural thing they play together at club level. And there is an argument Alex Mitchell comes back in as well as our best 9. He's got that connection with him too. But I think that's more of an easier change than going to a George Ford and bringing him off the bench. So there is people are saying, well, why don't we play Marcus at fullback? I think you double down and back Marcus Smith at 10 and have Finn Smith on the bench to be that fly half that can change and can control and can still fizz the attack around, with Marcus Smith potentially moving to fullback later in the game. But I think you've got to back Marcus Smith. He is a individualistic 10, if that's even a word, around what he does personally with the ball and his goose step and his, he looks for opportunities, whereas Finn Smith is more of a 10, probably a bit like myself. And that's not me comparing myself to Finn Smith, but I never really looked for holes myself because they weren't big enough or I wasn't fast enough. But it was all about getting the ball in other players' hands at the right time, going to the line, making the plays. Whereas Marcus Smith does possibly take a little look for himself, and because that's one of his strengths, right? But we've seen moments in this autumn campaign where he's created those moments himself and he's created brilliance and tries off the back of his individual skill. So do you want to take that out the team or move him to fullback to hope for the best with that? Or do you want to back him completely and give him a good attacking framework where everyone is comfortable, play him and have an attack that flows, getting to the edge, looking to get to the wider channels with our exciting players? when Theo Boso comes back, I think, we need to see him ball in hand more as well. So I'm sticking with Marcus Smith at 10, but 100% Finn Smith needs to be an option from the bench.
Yeah, they need to unearth some front rows as well. I know Apoko Fajour came on at the weekend, and big shout out to him, age of 20, getting capped as well. But I look at like France with George-Henri Colombe coming on for France, like absolute monsters. England have a slight Achilles heel now with an ageing front row. I know Luke Cowan-Dickie came on, thought Jamie George played really well at the weekend. Luke Cowan-Dickie came on and did well and added a little bit of power. But England teams of old is based on that kind of power that they've had up front. And I look at like the French team, I look at the Springboks, you look at even Australia as well, with the power and the influence that their players have in carrying and over ball. I think you'd be looking to get a little bit more out of the next England front row that comes through.
Yeah. You talk about Asher Opoku Fajour, right? There ain't many props in the world that can play loose head and tight head. So if you're his agent, you're like, $500,000 bags right now, please, because he can go and bang a scrum on both sides. And he's not the finished article by any means. It's amazing to see him get his first cap at the weekend, and he looks like a confident young lad who will back himself. So I don't want to, I'm not retiring Dan Cole as we speak, but you talk about, I thought Will Stewart was very good at the weekend. Opoku Fajour comes on and he's the future. So now is the time to move away a little bit from Dan Cole and have him as a third or fourth choice if times are hard and you get a few big injuries. But you've got to back Opoku Fajour. He can play loose head, tight head. I think Steve prefers him as a tight head. And that's where, the big gaping hole is in terms of experience behind what Dan Cole's done, who's had an unbelievable England career, but it is time to move on and, back some of the younger lads. We had Fasogbon come on and send you a voice note. These need experience and game time to see what the difference is between where they're at under 20s and club level to we need to start backing them. And that's where I go back to Steve's selection at the weekend against a Japanese team with a bin man, a fisherman and a sushi maker. He didn't experiment at all, did he? Apart from Opoku Fajour on the bench, but he went with what he thought was his strongest team because he was desperate for a win. And it's a missed opportunity. But I think the time is now to blood some of the younger players. Theo Dan at Sarries as well, a young hooker. We've got Jamie George and gone at the minute. You've got Jamie George and Cowan-Dickie. Yeah, same with Finn Smith. Back him as your second 10. George Ford, time's up. But the older guys could be third or fourth choice players if there's a spate of injuries in that certain position. But time is now, and we've seen it with China Cunningham South, players like that that need time and opportunities to show what they're good at, and that's where the future lies for England. It's just, will Steve worry too much about results when, if we're being brutally honest, we've won 5 out of 12 test matches this year. And here's a stat for you, Jim. Eddie Jones, his last year in charge, he won 5 out of 12 test matches and got the sack. So if you're comparing stuff, and I know there was a lot of other undertones around Eddie Jones getting the sack, and we've heard a load of stuff around. He's got a new book out called Caring for Care, a little jibe that he put into a press conference. But facts are facts. 5 from 12 ain't good enough. So Steve, does he worry about his job and results and wins, or does he try and push these younger lads through with no experience, but bags of potential if they're allowed to flourish? And that's the big question.
Pod.
Rugby pod.